Now, there's not really anything wrong with the water, but this fella is doing very badly. His tail is pretty much picked off, and he's actually very skinny. So if you look at his belly there, he pretty much is. If you look at the belly, you can clearly see the belly's doing that. The belly's not doing that. So basically, this fella. Where is he? So he's very thin, and he's very picked on. So either he's not getting enough food. I'll need to find out what he's being fed, but he's got a very pitted stomach, and he's got no fins. So either the other fish are picking on his fins, or he's not getting enough food. So we need to feed some sort of algae wafer to fatten him up. Now, if you have fish like bristlenose or plecostomus catfish, it's really important that you feed them like a wafer, because if you look at the belly of this fella, you'll see that the belly goes up, not down. So he needs a wafer because he's lacking energy and all his fins are picked on, which is either low immune system from not enough food or the other fish are just picking on it. So feeding a wafer is very important for these sorts of fish. You can't rely on algae. So now I'm doing a gravel clean, and the gravel is very, very dirty. So it's way overdue for a gravel clean. So it's important the gravel is cleaned regularly. Otherwise you get all sorts of bad bacteria, which is building up in the gravel. And it's definitely not good for the fish. Definitely not any of those fish. So the water coming out is very dirty. Now, I definitely recommend that every aquarium have a flipper, and it's a bladed magnet that goes on the glass, because it's really easy on a regular basis just to go like that with your flipper and it'll knock all this stuff off. Whereas if you don't do that, then when you go to clean it, the algae's really, really stuck on, and you'll find that with a scourer, it's very hard to get off. So having a flipper and regularly running over it makes your job way easier than trying to do it every now and then with a scourer. So I'd recommend getting a flipper. Now, with these corner filters, it's really important that there's water in the filter if the heater's on. So it's really important that this heater is not on if this area is not full of water. Otherwise, the heater can burn out. So this heater must be off if the water isn't full in this section. And this heater was not plugged in. So I'm actually a little bit scared to plug it in, because most time if a heater's unplugged, it's usually because it doesn't work, and I don't want to get a zap. Now, this is a heater, and a heater heats the water, and it has a thermostat in it. And I'm going to take this one away and test it, because it was not on. So that indicates maybe it's old and maybe it was shorting the power, which we don't want to do right now. Now, every aquarium must have a thermometer. So the thermometer is going to test the temperature, which the heater does not do. So by just sticking that on the glass, we'll be able to find out what the temperature is. At some point we might want to replace that tube as well, because that tube is pretty well ready to go out. In the video it doesn't look too bad, but in real life that's lit up and that's hardly lit up. So this is very low priority, but replacing that extra tube at some point is going to be warranted. The temperature is currently 26 degrees, so I'm actually very happy with that, but that needs to be kept an eye on, because the heater is currently not on. There is actually an under gravel heater, but my confidence in that is relatively low. So I'm going to ask that the temperature gets regularly checked, and if it stays at 26 degrees, then I'm happy. With these plants, over time they start looking all manky, so you probably get a couple of years out of them, then you've got to chuck them out. But if you want to get a bit more life out of these, what you want to do is chuck them in the sun for a day, then turn them over, hit them in the sun for a day again, then hit them with a hose, and they'll usually come up good as new. So taking these ones out and put them in the sun will give them some new life. So currently this aquarium has a GH of about 14, which is good but on the high side. It is a KH of about 8 or 9, which is good but on the high side. It has a pH of about 7.8, which is good but on the high side. It has no ammonia, no nitrite, and the nitrate is probably around 20. So water quality is not the problem. The problem with this fish that we're losing is nutrients. Or it could actually be old age, because it's also a very old fish. No one knows how old it is. So when you get a really old fish, that fella there, he's not holding his weight, but that could be because of his age. So he may have had a go, especially if you're talking about a fish in excess of sort of 7 to 10 years. He could just be old. This is a normal aquarium heater, which is sort of perfect for a situation like this. Now, if you have a planted aquarium and you want the roots of the plants to be warmer, you might go for an under gravel heater. Now, an under gravel heater is very good for a plant tank where you're not disturbing the substrate, but in a fish tank where you're wanting to gravel clean the substrate, these under gravel filter heaters are an absolute pain in the neck because they keep coming up and they are disturbed every time that you clean the gravel. Now, when you're overhauling an aquarium that hasn't had attention for a while, there's only so much you can do. So in this case, visibility has gone to basically 0. So what we're really best off doing is giving the tank a bit of a service and then coming back in a week or so and then giving the aquarium another service, then coming back in a week or so and giving the aquarium another service until we get all the junk out and we get it nice and clean. But you really can't go from having an aquarium not looked after for a while and then magically you get all of the waste out in one go, because visibility gets too low and you can't change too much water at a time, particularly in winter. As it's getting colder here in Sydney, I can't go changing too much water. Otherwise, I'll end up dropping the temperature and giving the fish white spot. So small service regularly is much better than a real big service. At the moment, this tank is run on a canister filter and there's nothing else running this tank, which means there's absolutely no contingency at all, which means if something happens to that canister, then there is nothing that is going to be a backup. So what I'm highly going to recommend is that we add an air pump, and the air pump can act as a backup. The other thing is that once we fill the water up and then the water isn't spraying through a gap, then what can happen is the oxygen level can fall, because the canister actually grows lots of good bacteria and the canister sucks the oxygen out of the water. So I'm highly going to recommend that we add an air pump to this tank. Now, this tank looks like it was set up to be a plant tank, so it's got an under gravel heater and no air pump, but it's got silver dollars in here, and silver dollars love eating plants. So these fish are incompatible with a plant tank. So if you were going to make this a plant tank, we wouldn't need the air stone, we'd need to replace the silver dollars. But if you wanted to keep the silver dollars, I wouldn't bother with the plant tank. I would consider adding an air pump as a must. Considering we've already changed that much water and the tank is very, very dirty, we're going to need a replacement, an extra service ASAP, and then I'll clean the canister. The canister was pumping well, so I'm not going to clean the canister today because I don't want to remove enough water to clean it. I have cleaned the internal filter, and I am going to add some polyfilter to the internal filter. So that's about all I want to do today, but I want to return as soon as possible, and I want to clean the canister and give another tank another overhaul. Checking the fish stuff, we have some very good quality fish food. Very happy to see that. Now we have some easy carbo. We might be able to use that to get rid of the blackbeard algae, but I probably wouldn't bother about it. We have some fertilizer, which we would definitely not use because the tank doesn't have plants, and it does have silver dollars and they eat plants. It's got some more plant food and some more plant food, so I would not be using any of that. It's also got a old magnet cleaner that's very old. I'd chuck that out and get a flipper. So besides the fish food, none of that is any use to us. What we do need is water ager, so I'll supply some water ager because it's very important that when we add new water, we need to be adding water ager. So I would be interested to know that when they top the tank up, when it evaporates, what are they adding to the water? Because there's nothing here that would indicate that there's not chlorine going into the tank. And obviously chlorine going into the tank is going to be a major problem. And that can affect the equilibrium of the tank, because if you have chlorine going into the tank, the chlorine's going to kill the good bacteria, and then the good bacteria should be breaking down the waste from the fish. And if the chlorine has killed the good bacteria, that means that you create a more desirable circumstance for the algae. It's very common that when I leave an aquarium, it looks worse than when I started. And that's because when you clean up an aquarium, you can only do so much at a time, because I can't go changing too much water, otherwise I'll shock the fish. So instead of doing one big major overhaul, which really isn't an option, it's really much better to do several cleans to get the tank back on track. So I would love to see some new ornaments in this tank. I would love to see those grubby old plants either put out in the sun or even replaced. And I'd love to see some lovely new colourful fish. Maybe some electric yellows, some peacocks, and some nice, very colourful, very hardy, easy to keep fish. Otherwise, maybe a couple of Oscars would temporarily look really good, and they're a very interactive fish. But adding some extra fish once we clean the tank up and add some new ornaments is going to give this tank a whole new life. But right now, it probably looks worse than when I started, and that's expected.